Hi, and welcome back for another edition of Game Changer Chat. I have on my green, again, we're talking about mental health awareness for the month of May. And I have another special guest you're really going to enjoy, Shelly Hauser, who is a podcast producer and host and a disability advocate. Shelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Shelly, for those of us who do not know about you, your expertise, and your background, please tell us, why are you an expert in talking about disability inclusion?
Well, I live in northeastern Pennsylvania, born and raised, and I was born a hemipelvectomy, which most people don't really know what that is. So it means basically I was born without my right hip and my leg. So it's not really slowed me down. I spent the first 18 years of my life visiting Shriners Hospital in Philly, a great institution. And 1990, I was in college when the ADA was signed by then President Bush Sr. And I've just been starting to learn and grow and understand what disability advocacy means to me, as well as the newer amputees and newer persons with disabilities that come along that have to learn this. I worked with new amputees and kind of helped them learn to create their new life and think about themselves in a different way and plan what the next chapter of their lives are going to look like. And currently, I'm working in Berks County, Pennsylvania, at a Center for Independent Living, one of about 17 in the state of Pennsylvania, as a disability resource manager, continuing on to help persons with mental and physical disabilities find their way and empower them.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I forgot to mention, if everyone who's watching right now, can you please just type in the box where geographically you're located in the world? Just simply type Pennsylvania, California, LA, DC, Woodbridge. Shout out where you're located, and please don't forget to hit the like button. What it does is when you hit the like button, it shares this interview with other people who are connected to you. And since the purpose of doing these interviews is to pass along information in regards to awareness as applicable to inclusion for individuals with disabilities, share the information. Don't be selfish. Um, we want to give a shout out to Joni, um, Andrew, Carol. Joni is in Virginia. So thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Don't forget to hit
thank you.
like. So, Shelley, please tell us, why is disability advocacy so important for the ADA generation?
Well, I'm finding in working with new amputees and persons that are still that their disability has found them. They're not being taught what the ADA is. And this year, the American with Disabilities Act is turning 30. And
Yes.
we just got to get that out there and tell everybody, because if they don't learn what the ADA is, they don't understand what their rights are. They don't know how to advocate for themselves or know that they have rights. And all of those millions of voices are lost with employment and travel and tourism and just voting rights. And it's just so sad to see that. And I tell them, I travel around to senior living centers and I help advocate and educate them with the new law that came out through Governor Wolf here in Pennsylvania in October, that anybody can do a mail-in vote. They don't have to have a disability and they don't have to be in military anymore.
Right.
And once they realize that they don't have to have a reason to use the absentee ballot and that they can just use a regular mail-in ballot, they have their voice back. They have their choice back to vote in who they feel is going to have their best interest in heart and look out for them. And that's really important.
Very, very important. And here's time I have to give you some kudos. Please tell everyone about the very special award that you received and how you achieved that.
So, working in my Center of Independent Living, I'm finishing my 5th year there. And I have learned and I have grown so much, and I'm so grateful for this tiny little nonprofit that has grown and blossomed. It's called Abilities in Motion, and we have social media and our podcast that we started, and we're really just through my new position that they created. They're really just starting to grow and expand, and just come up with some amazing ideas to really reach just beyond our little community of Berks County. And we're all very excited and growing in a really, really great direction. So, my former director had nominated me, unbeknownst to me, to Nickel's Region 3 Award. So, Nickel, NCIL, is the National Council for Independent Living. And Region 3 consists of six states, including Washington, D.C., and I won the Region 3 Nickel Award for my voting disability advocacy work. Yay! Just getting that word out there and making it a very inclusive, empowering, and educated um, opportunity for anybody with a physical or mental disability. Um, some of our mental health patients really felt with their mental health they didn't have the right to
Yes.
vote, and I know some people that have TBIs, traumatic brain injuries. They
Mm-hmm.
actually, in some states in the United States today, once you have like a TBI or maybe something like schizophrenia or something
Mm-hmm.
that a judge can deem um, too too serious to vote,
Mm-hmm.
their voting rights are being literally taken away from them in
Wow.
the United States today. And that is so
Wow.
frightening. Now, Pennsylvania is not one of those states, but trust me, I watch it. And there are
Mm-hmm.
people, when they have a traumatic brain injury, that they're deemed by some judge to not qualify to vote.
Mm-hmm.
We can't have that in America today.
No, 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 we can't have that. That's just about like in African American or brown communities, how a lot of
Yeah.
people believe my vote won't count, and so they don't go out
Yep.
and vote. Yes, in all
Yep.
marginalized communities, which includes individuals with disabilities, your vote does count. So I'm
Yep.
glad and proud of the work that you have been doing for our sister and brothers who have disabilities, because that work needs to be done. And I will start doing more research on it because I had no idea about the TBI. And of course, a
Yep.
lot of veterans have traumatic brain injuries. So it's
Yeah.
definitely be very misjustice that
Yeah.
a veteran could come back from war, but then because they have a TBI, they can't vote. And of
Yep.
course,
Yeah.
individuals who have not served have TBIs as well. But it
Yeah.
definitely would be awful if a veteran can't vote because they have a TBI.
Yeah.
Um,
I can also tell you that we have a large Latino community, and Abilities in Motion is really blessed to have a beautiful, diverse group of coworkers and that are from so many different diverse cultures. And we have the best food when we have a meeting. I'll tell you that right now. But we work really hard. If I can't translate, I can go to most of my coworkers and say, "Hey, can I borrow you to make sure that the Latino community with us in the Reading area is really educated and understands what their rights are." So we are very particular about that, and I work personally with our local Reading chapter of the LGBT community
yes,
of Greater Reading, and make sure that our brothers and sisters are well loved and well educated, and that they know what their rights are, especially if they're transgender, that they're
yes,
not, you know what I'm saying? And it's
yes,
so important to
absolutely,
make sure that their voices are heard. Um, they're still who they are on the inside. Just,
absolutely,
they're, what kind of beautiful butterfly they transferred into on the outside just looks different. And that should not shut them down to have their voices and their rights heard. So, I'm passionate about equality on so many levels.
hmm so am I. And that brings me to talk about how do you, what groups, other groups do you collaborate with, and why is collaboration so important when you're talking about disability inclusion for individuals with mental health impairments or physical impairments?
So I work with the LGBTQ group. I work with a lot of senior citizen groups.
Yes.
I check out like women's shelters and make sure
Yes.
that they don't forget to have their rights and their voices heard, because in abusive situations, their voices often are silenced. So I check in with
Yeah.
that, and I've worked with the Boy
Mm.
Scout troop since my now 21-year-old was in first grade. So
Aw.
I am really passionate about the kiddos that are going to be able to start to vote or were able to start to vote
Mhm.
last year. I believe there were like 4 million of them that are able to
Mhm.
vote, formally this time. And, that can make a big impact. That's a
It
lot of
can.
voices that could change a lot of things. And that new generation really has a lot of heart and soul going for it. So I think the kiddos that are in their 20s and in college, I still take them under my wing, and I have a lot of love for them, and because they're our future. And
Absolutely.
and I want them to understand. They're helping me understand more about the LGBTQ center
Mhm.
community, and
Mhm.
I'm teaching them about the old
Disability.
school where I grew up in the
Yeah.
70s and the 80s, and
Mhm.
what we've done for disability mental health rights.
Yes.
SILs were only started in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s through Ed Roberts out in Berkeley, California. If somebody really wants to understand what Judy Heumann and Justin Dart and Ed Roberts have done,
Yes.
yeah, I want them to check out at Netflix Crip Camp, CRIP
Mhm.
Camp. It's on Netflix. It's a phenomenal film. And for me, growing up disabled during those decades, it was a huge eye opener, and it really encompassed and was incredibly inclusive from day one, whether it was a physical disability or a mental
Mhm.
disability. And they
So
really thought outside the box to just dig in, roll up their sleeves, and get that job done. And I can't thank, Judy and Justin and Ed and all those other phenomenal people that fought and continue to fight for us and with us. And I think people of my generation really feel, and even some of the younger folks I've been talking to feel, that we need to pick up those torches before they go out and
yeah.
carry them through. And so
Mhm.
this is so, so important. Um, I decided to go back for my master's degree recently, and talking to a young 26-year-old classmate, and she's been bullied and she's almost lost her voice at
Mhm.
26. And
Mhm.
she, it's such a shame to see that a generation later and some things are still happening. And we're
Mhm.
going to talk about that in a little while, of why we can't have that. But, we really need to kind of pay all this education forward for these generations that are coming into their disabilities, and keep those voices loud and strong.
Thank you so much, Shelley, for that. And you mentioned some great ways that people can get involved in the community
Hmm.
partnership with Girl Scouts of America, Boy Scouts of America.
Yeah.
Go to community. Um, just find out what's in your community and go there so they can learn more about your culture. You can learn about their culture. Those are all fantastic ideas. So that's the only way that we can shrink the gap and
Hmm.
the being more inclusive, and not
Yeah.
just here on US soil, globally, because we know that people are tuning in across the world. These ideas are not just something that you can do in the United States. You can do this
Yeah.
anywhere. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And about the grassroots, yes, we still need to have some of the things that were going on in the grassroots, and just maybe be a little more strategic,
Hmm.
and don't lose the passion, the fire. And we need the knowledge of the people who
Yeah.
were the Justin Darts. We need all of that. That not who are working in that era. We still need that. We need to work collectively to make
Yeah.
effective change.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
when we're working together, but it's very important people understand there's etiquette is associated with proper etiquette when you're working with individuals with disabilities, especially those who have physical disabilities. There's some etiquette that goes along there. And
Yeah.
also, of course, it's a little harder when you can't see the disability. Like
Yeah.
with me, people, if they looked at me, they would not know how many, the list is long, disabilities that I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
But can you just go through some tips, just high level tips that um, for people with disabilities so that people who are unfamiliar with our culture, so that it could be helpful to them?
Sure, sure. So I think no matter what culture you come from or what country you come from, it has to be a matter of respect. Yeah, that's it. Um, Listen to that person with the disability, whether you can see the disability or not. You must regard them, say a healthcare professional or a therapist absolutely has to regard that person that they're dealing with or working with as the professional in the room. We at Abilities in Motion want you to help yourself. So we
Yeah.
teach self advocacy, self awareness, empowerment, education. We want persons with mental or physical disabilities to learn to be resilient, learn to stand up for themselves, but know what their rights are. In so many different countries, mental health in particular is shunned and not talked about. And now I know Australia, I have a amputee and a friend in Australia, and she said they really put out a really great initiative a few years ago to um, to crush the stigma, to start
Yes.
talking about it in the culture like they do in England. After Princess
Hmm.
Diana went through with what she went through and then she was killed.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, that wasn't an
Hmm.
accident. For me, she was killed. Her sons have really grown up to be really beautiful
Hmm.
human beings, and they, along with their wives, have really put out a great initiative um, to openly talk about mental health
Yes.
in England. And they had a whole commercial with the four of them, and they
Yes.
really have been pushing that. Sadly, some countries you can almost be imprisoned, and so
Mm.
the stigma really needs to change, and people in the community need to listen. And you don't have to open up your advice. Sometimes you just need to shut up and just listen and just be
Yeah.
there. And sometimes just letting that person process things helps, and just be
Yes.
supportive and let them make their own choices. That's, the as a service coordinator, when I started at Abilities, one thing that we really talked about was the right to choose. And
Hmm.
sometimes, in my opinion, and other people's opinions, our consumers made choices that weren't stable or good choices in our opinions. But you educate them, you tell them the pros and cons, you respectfully discuss it with them, and ultimately at the end of the day, their choice is their right. And if
Yes.
that's their comfort level of how they want to live their life, they have that right. And if it goes well, then it's their right. And if it didn't go well and they need to go to another plan and try something else, then you just need to be there and be supportive and say, okay, what didn't go well with that choice, and what did go well with that choice, and what do you think we need to try this time? And let
Right.
them be empowered, let them make those educational
Mhm.
decisions.
Right. That is so important. I would like to talk about being agile and being flexible. You, I know, are extremely flexible, even by presence here today. So please talk about the importance of being flexible as an inclusive leader.
Sure. Being an inclusive leader, the way I work is I try to get to know everybody that I'm working with and find out what their interests are, what their strengths are, but more importantly, what their weaknesses are. And sometimes
Mm.
we have the opportunity to pair somebody's weakness with somebody's strength. And by that
Mhm.
person having the strength, they take on empowerment themselves to teach the person with the weakness a skill. So that educates both of them, it empowers both of them, and it pays it forward to somebody else. So,
Mhm.
and by doing that, it gives everybody a job, everybody a choice, everybody's voice to be heard, and
Yes.
feel important in a project, whether it's in my personal life or in volunteering.
Mhm. Yes.
There's room for everybody out there.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Everybody, don't forget to hit like. And if you have any questions, drop them in the question box. Um, let's talk about employment of those individuals with disabilities.
Hmm.
The statistics out there show that people with disabilities are unemployed at a disproportionate rate to those
Yes.
people who do not indicate that they have disabilities. And then statistics also indicate that people with disabilities are the most loyal employees. But there's
Hmm.
some challenges when employees come to work with disabilities. Let's
Right.
discuss some of the challenges that either you've experienced or some of your clients have told you about. And
Hmm.
then we could talk about solutions.
Sure. So the Title One of the ADA really talks about employment, and somebody that doesn't know what exactly that is, I really invite you to go check it out under Title One. There's five different titles or sections under the ADA laws, and you can find them anywhere on Google or Bing or Yahoo. And some of the sites are a really easy read. So that's first and foremost. Second of all, employers are, they have that equal opportunity employer opportunity
Mm-hmm.
statement at the bottom. But we all know that they sometimes don't really follow that. And I know you've had other guests that have brilliantly discussed that. And they're so impassioned about it. And I was so proud to hear that. I was so excited when I heard that on some of your other guests. But I know I had a coworker who was physically abled, but he had a lot of chronic pain due to a on the job fall at a construction site. And when he was still
Mm-hmm.
healing, he used a cane to get around while his back was still healing. And he was telling me that the minute an employer saw him walk with a cane, they wrapped up his interview really, really quick or canceled his interview
Mm-hmm.
altogether. And he was a 25-year journeyman carpenter, so he had
Mm-hmm.
everything up here, but he couldn't
Mm-hmm.
get employed to be like a planner in the office. And
Mm-hmm.
then he came to work for us, and he did 2 years of planning home modifications for persons with disabilities on our caseloads. And he had it all up here. He was brilliant. He knew
Yeah.
exactly. So when he talked to our contractors, he had the same language, and it was brilliant.
Yeah.
And he was so wonderful at what he did. And we were so blessed to have him for the years that we did. So employers really are missing out. I believe it's
Mm-hmm.
almost 70 some percent of persons with, that are able bodied are employed versus
Mm-hmm.
maybe 17 to 20 some percent of persons
Mm-hmm.
with mental, visible or invisible disabilities,
Mm-hmm.
unemployed. And we can have doctorates, masters, um,
Absolutely.
and if you don't, and it's easier to cover it up and not say anything when it's an invisible disability, but
Mm-hmm.
eventually, the employer or HR need to know what's going on if it's going to impact your
Right.
employment. But there's
Yeah.
reasonable accommodations by law. And this is a really big one in the amputee pages that I follow on Facebook. New amputees want to get back to work. They want to get back to what they were doing or reinvent themselves, and it's a wonderful concept. But time and time again, it comes up of, do I have to delve into the fact of what my disability is at an interview? The answer is
Mm-hmm.
no. By law, the employer is not allowed to ask or imply anything about any perceived disability, visible or invisible, until the job offer is made. Once the job offer is made, and after that, when you've taken the job, it is up to the person with the visible or invisible disability at their control and leisure to
Mm-hmm.
explain their disability as much or as little as they want to. And if they need reasonable accommodations at that time after the job offer has been given, then they are allowed to legally discuss it, but not
Yes.
until then.
Right. Right. 100%. So if you were to be talking right now to middle managers and leaders and organizations, what will you to say to them about what they're perhaps not getting about this untapped labor source?
We see that a lot of employers hide behind, oh, well, they weren't qualified. oh, the job is no longer available, or oh, we've hired, and so many times, even with myself over the years, I've found those excuses to
Mhm.
not be true, and that's all they are. They're excuses. So
Yeah.
employers really need, I mean, they've had 30 years with the ADA to get themselves up to speed. And at this point, it's all it is an excuse. Richard Branson, I think we all know who Sir Richard Branson is from Virgin
Mhm.
Mobile, and
Mhm.
he actually has dyslexia, and he's done really
Mhm.
pretty okay for himself. But he has a really
Mhm.
wonderful team of about 14 adults on the spectrum that are his massive think tank that he is so proud to fund and promote, that they are some of his most brilliant minds with Virgin. Um, you know, I can tell you time and time again, all these famous people that have disabilities. Ed Sheeran, the singer, he had a stutter,
Mhm.
and he was born without part of his inner ear, and he's an international singer. He did
Mhm.
he did okay for himself. Um,
Yeah.
and it's just, I really think employers are missing the mark. And like you said earlier, and thank you for mentioning it, they are missing out on some of the hardest workers that are so grateful to have work at fair pay, and they are so loyal, more so than a lot of other people that come in and complain every day. So they're really missing
Mhm.
out on some um, great opportunities there because of what they perceive, what they think this person can and cannot do. I can tell
Right.
you, for my honeymoon, I went 3 track skiing in Austria and Germany.
Yeah.
You know,
Woo.
and I've gone on to having 3 children with no hip and no leg. And I can
Yes.
rock climb and I can do all these things. Let
Yes.
the person with the disability set
Right.
their standards. Let them
Yes.
set their limitations. Please don't disrespect another human being and tell them what you think their limitations are. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It makes sense to me, but you out there, hiring managers, recruiters, CEO, do you understand what Shelly is saying? Hope so. And if you have any questions, feel free to DM her or myself.
Mhm.
As we're beginning to reopen from COVID, please share your thoughts. And you touched on this a little bit about flexible work hours and extended medical leave policies. What do you think people need to know about this?
I think some of my coworkers, depending on the disability, even mental disabilities and wellness, this is a very, very stressful time for some of our folks in this community. And we need to be very delicate and flexible and understanding that, while we look okay on the outside, we may not be okay on the inside.
Yes.
And I think for some of us, introverts in particular, and persons with mental health, maybe anxiety and social
Yes.
anxiety challenges that they have, maybe being home for them more often like this is really working out nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, extroverts like myself are climbing the walls a
Mm-hmm.
little bit and missing hugging everybody every day. Um, so it's um, it's really important, and I think moving forward, we have proved ourselves as a society to be able to really function at home and be those teachers, be those caregivers, and
Right.
be those coworkers, and still stay connected. I mean, you're still doing these interviews, and
Yes.
I'm talking with my coworkers and my consumers that need help every day. We have a chat line for folks that feel isolated and have questions, and I field those calls as they come in, and sometimes they're just lonely, um, and they
Yeah.
just really want to talk. But with the technology that we have, we can get it done. We can stay
Mm-hmm.
connected, and we can still care for each other and for ourselves. So we need to
Yeah.
really take that step back and say, you know what, this isn't working for me, or this
Mm-hmm.
is working for me. And moving forward, I think I would do better emotionally or physically to have some space. And for our
Mm-hmm.
coworkers and our friends in the community that are more physically fragile, maybe cancer or seizures, I think our society really needs to talk about that openly. Time and time again, I'm hearing the news talking just about elderly folks and how vulnerable
Mhm.
they are. And
Mhm.
the society, the media is really not bringing up, for the most part that I've seen or heard, they're really not talking about the medically fragile persons with disabilities, whether that covers physical or mental
Yes.
disabilities. And I
Yes.
really don't think that they're getting it. The media, giving a shout
Mhm.
out to the media, I really think they need to do a better job of not
Mhm.
just harping on the elderly folks, but they need
Mhm.
to be a little more inclusive and put that spotlight where it needs to be, and talk about the medically and physically
Mhm.
community.
Yes. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Let me look to see what comments we have. Joni is definitely committed. We've talked before. She's committed to inclusion regarding emergency action plans, which includes individuals with disabilities. That's part of the work that she does, and that was a
Yeah,
comment she left. She's
great.
very passionate about it, and she's enjoying this conversation.
Oh, thanks.
Um, how do you establish healthy boundaries with people while you're trying to manage your health as far as mental, whether it's your mental health or your physical health? Sometimes
Mhm.
I know for a fact I sometimes have a problem with saying no because I don't want to hurt other people's feelings.
Yeah,
But and that goes into some of the other medical issues that I have with,
yes.
anxiety, PTSD, depression. So what advice do you give to people who are similarly situated who have a hard time with putting up boundaries? What would you say to them?
I recently read somewhere, and I apologize, I don't remember where, but it talked about when you say no, you're not saying no to the person. You have to understand you're saying no to the request.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's nothing personal, and you don't need to feel bad about it. You shouldn't feel bad about it. Um, you can only say yes to so many things. And the other thing is, if you can't say yes, like your boss says, I really need you to come in on Saturday, but you have, Johnny's soccer league tournament game that runs all day depending on how well they do. You have the right to want to be there for yourself and for your children or your parents, or whatever else, without making an excuse. And it's not an excuse. Just say, you know what, I'm not able to do that. Is there something maybe I can do Friday night? Some paperwork I can do Friday night, or come in early Monday and Tuesday morning, that I could be helpful either beforehand or afterwards, in another capacity. And that's okay. We need to take care, and any mother out there knows that if you do not take care of yourself first, nobody else is going to.
Yes.
And you have to put yourself first every time. It's like a bucket filler. If you give out all of your little droplets of love and energy out of that bucket every day, and you don't replenish it somehow, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
dry up. And then you've
True.
hit bottom. And in regards to that whole emergency mental health preparedness thing, we've talked about that, and I've been trained with that. um, we have to have an action plan for when we spiral downward mentally, for when we hit an emergency situation that we don't plan on. And we need to do those things when we're in a good mental healthy space,
True.
that we feel safe and we feel calm. And maybe laminate it and put it on the refrigerator. Keep it next to your
Mm-hmm.
bedside. Keep a copy of it in your purse or your wallet or in your car. So if you have a panic attack, or you hit an emergency of a fire or a flood or a car accident, and it sets something off inside you, that you have that action plan in your hand. So if you don't have the ability to maybe think straight, and you start spiraling, and you can't find your grounding, just stop and breathe and follow that list that you came up with, and know and trust that that list is going to work. Because so many times we find that persons with mental health, um, when an emergency, they have to evacuate a building or something. Um, it's harder for them to just drop and go to plan B and C,
Hmm.
and that's more dangerous for them. So they need to help themselves when they're in a good space.
That's a very good point. When you're clear minded and in a good space. Thank you for that. Don't forget to hit like. Let me move on. Dr. Roz says she's great conversation lady. She was one of the guests, and Carol is chiming in from Florida. She tunes in regularly. Hey Carol, hey Dr. Roz. Um, let's talk about again about a little bit about the unemployment. And we talked when we were preparing for this interview about reinventing ourselves. The
Yeah.
unemployment rate is staggering right now with people who are with disabilities and individuals who don't have disabilities. Walk me through what you recommend for individuals who are trying to reinvent themselves during this time frame. What
Hmm.
does that look like? Because I know you've done it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I worked in media and communications. That was my bachelor degree, and I'm not doing, besides the podcasts and stuff, I'm really not doing much of that these days. But what I found, and ironically, I just had this conversation with a woman through LinkedIn today. Donna and I spoke about this. She had a lot of corporate um, experience. But then she went on to have children with special needs, and she couldn't read fast enough to learn how to care for her children and advocate for her children and the IEPs that they needed through the schools.
Mm,
And now she's trying to reinvent herself again as the children have gone on. Part of my conversation with her in listening to what her passions were and her abilities were, she worked for IKEA, and her major was
mm,
fashion. And
mm,
so, but she had all this advocacy and personal experience under her belt as well with her own children and her own self. So I said to her, why don't you look to go back to a corporate company like IKEA or some other company that you really admire, and look to be a diversity and inclusion manager or
yeah.
director, right?
Mm-hmm.
And work with the corporations to teach them what persons with mental and physical challenges can do, and what
Mm-hmm.
reasonable accommodations can look like,
Mm-hmm.
inexpensively but creatively. A
Mm-hmm.
reasonable accommodation doesn't have to be, a $20,000 remake of the whole building. It could
Yes.
be just
Yes.
rearranging their desk space. It could be giving them
Absolutely.
a standing desk space.
Mm-hmm.
But work with that person with the disability
Mm-hmm.
and ask them, hey, what works for you at home? What's worked for you in the past and what hasn't worked? And let's think outside the box together. Um,
Yes.
Working as a volunteer and maybe making phone
Yes.
calls. New
Mm-hmm.
amputees can work with amputee empowerment through
Mm-hmm.
through Hanger or some other amputee coalition of America, and they can field calls to new amputees that are going through the same or similar situations that just need an ear. And that gives both persons involved in that conversation empowerment and being able to tell their story. And it's a very healing process. I get to do
Yeah.
it through Villanova University, doing their medical simulations, their hands-on simulations as an amputee. And the scenarios we have are sometimes I have congestive heart failure or um, COPD or a torn rotator cuff or something like that. And so it's very hands-on for the students, and it's very empowering for the students to have that safe space to talk to somebody who's been through this and understands it, and it makes them better nurses as they go through their education at Villanova. So everybody has a talent, everybody
Yeah.
has a purpose. So
Yes.
everybody needs to sit down and find a goal and
Mm-hmm.
create with what they can do and empower themselves.
Hey, awesome recommendations for everyone. Who should you um who should you share the list with? The emergency who should you share the emergency plans list with? Joni is asking. And Dr. Ross says there's so much power in an action plan. When you were talking
Yeah.
about the emergency plan, Joni said, who should you share that list with?
If she reaches out to me and I can give her my contact information at the end, and I can maybe have you link on it as well. We
Hmm.
did a really great seminar out in Harrisburg a few years ago, and there's actually an action plan. And one of my coworkers, Teresa, goes around and teaches it through our Center for Independent Living. And it's a brilliant form to fill out. It's a packet that they fill out with a caregiver or with a family member or somebody, a power of attorney, somebody they trust and respect, to go through the process. Even with my prosthetic, I mean, my prosthetic leg is over $70,000, because it's an electronic device in some capacity. And I know in an emergency like a fire or a gas leak, I would have to leave that leg behind. Persons that are wheelchair users would have to leave their electric chair probably behind. And so we have to have that action plan. We have to talk about insuring our equipment, because I certainly don't have a money tree laying around with that kind of
Right.
with that kind of
Right.
cash to replace that.
Right.
So I've had my prosthetic insured on my auto insurance in case I'm in a car accident.
Oh,
Learned
okay.
that I learned that the hard way, and also with
Oh.
fire and flood and stuff. Yeah,
Hmm.
I was hit. I was broadsided. Somebody came out of an alley and didn't think he had to stop because there was no stop sign, and he T-boned me, and I broke the steel plate in my hip, and it was a $3,000 fix, and I had to fight. So I didn't go to the hospital because I even though I had a broken leg, but the hospital wasn't going to do anything, so I didn't go, and I had to fight with the insurance company for over a month to tell them over and over and over again why I refused ambulatory hospital care, even though I broke my leg. And they were so
Oh.
stupid, they were not getting it. So
Mm.
it took me a month to get the approval to get my leg fixed. So,
Mm.
um, so that was a challenge. That was a real challenge. Um, but yeah, we need to kind of figure things out, and society really needs to be a little more understanding. But
Absolutely. And I'm glad
we
you
can share
mentioned
that
that
list.
here. I'm pretty sure that helps somebody right now.
Yeah,
Oh.
we can share that whole packet list. I can send it to you. I can send it to anybody else that reaches out to me through LinkedIn,
Mm.
or I'll give them my phone number at the end, and we can share that because that's a really important packet to have. Um, so we educate that community.
Thank you. And why you talked about this, but a little bit, but I want to hear a more definitive answer. Why is the lived experience so important? Why is it important that you, as an individual with a disability, share your authentic story?
I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, not really having a voice um, to express and tell my story. And I really found that working with new amputees, through that process, and especially working at Villanova, I've really found my voice. And I found it to be a very healing and empowering opportunity to 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 talk about growing up as an amputee. And I really didn't think it was important. And much later in life, as a parent, I realized it was incredibly important, even though I was a congenital amputee and I didn't go through that trauma of loss, limb loss, that I still had a story to tell. We were in a circle talking one day, in a support group, and somebody said to me, Shelley, when did you mourn your loss? And I found that to be such a perplexing question, because being born that way, I didn't think I really had a loss. And it struck me to the point that I actually went home and cried for a couple of days, because in at that moment I realized I had a loss. Congenitally I had a loss, but I had a loss, and I was never given the platform or the opportunity to learn to be okay with it. And it struck me. It struck me very deeply, and I thought, I really need to talk about this psychologically. I go through anxiety and depression because my body doesn't do what I want it to do, and people question, should I have children? And oh, just have one kid, you'll be okay. Just have one. Well, I went on to have three because I wanted to. My husband wanted to. We wanted to. And I was over the moon to be able to have three very beautiful, very, very healthy children. And so for me, that was important. And I recently just spoke to another young amputee that's very similar in my situation. And she wants to get pregnant, and her doctor's telling her, yeah, it's probably not the best choice for you. Well, what I would say to that doctor is, yeah, it's really none of your damn business. Really. It's your business as your oath to take care of her and think outside the box, not judge her and tell her she can or cannot do something that she's young and healthy to do. So, I have a little bit of a problem with that. And I really think it's so important to have that voice. And I
Yeah.
find that I take my personal authentic self, and I'm so able to deep, delve deep into my own psychological and physical holistic self to say, I get what you're going through, and I want to
Yeah.
empower you. I want to educate you, and I want you to learn better and faster and understand deeper sooner than when I did. I didn't find my voice until I was
Yes.
28 years old.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I lashed out at somebody that bullied me at 28. And I
Mm-hmm.
missed out on so much prior to that.
Yeah.
So I really take it to heart that, every person that I touch and that I am involved with, it's an honor to work with them. It's an honor to be a part of their life, whether they call me on our chat line or they're somebody that is a part of my life in different chapters of my life for many years. It's a true honor.
Mm. Thank you for that. And I could definitely feel from what you just said, similarities that parallel
Good.
with my own story. Thank you so much. Can you please share with the listeners and the viewers what are some of the projects that you're working on now?
Um, so I continue to do voting advocacy. I will work the polls on June 2nd here in Pennsylvania. I think it's my civic duty, and I'm very proud to do that. I continue to work and create and reach out and connect with persons every day on different platforms of social media, to look for new and future podcast guests for our Center for Independent Living channel that we're doing. Um, Gosh, what else? Well, I went back and got my master's in human services and leadership. So I'm hoping that that goes well. I just started 2 weeks ago. um,
Yay.
yeah, yeah. And so I currently am working on a hospitality presentation that one of to
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
I want to reach out to tourism and travel and airlines and work with them so they better understand mental and physical challenges. So many times we've seen time and time again in recent news, which is just so distressing to me, that somebody on the spectrum is misunderstood by first emergency responders,
Mm,
and they've been shot. Their caregivers have been shot because they don't understand.
mm,
And that makes it very stressful for the emergency
mm.
responders that aren't understanding what they're seeing,
Yeah.
because our nonverbal community really, it needs to protect themselves. So that's a big passion of mine, working with our youth through our youth transition group at our SIL, and understanding them better and what exactly it means when they're nonverbal, and different ways to better understand how to better communicate with them. Another thing I think we should share with your community is I have a bilingual laminated community chart, and it's pictures and it's alphabet and it's listing parts of the body, and
Uh-oh.
phone like numbers, so that somebody that's nonverbal, whether it's due to maybe crushing their windpipe, or or they're just nonverbal on the spectrum, or they speak a different language. It's in Spanish and English, and I'd love to find the link and share that with everybody that's on the call, or anybody after this call is interested. I keep it in an emergency backpack, which is part of my emergency plan, that I have a whole emergency backpack. There's also sensory friendly backpacks that persons on the spectrum can have with them, whether it's just a little makeup bag or if it's a whole backpack, to keep them with their coping mechanisms, to keep them with devices that keep them safe
whether it's headphones or a fidget spinner. So there's a lot of really great coping mechanisms and resources out there that are available to anybody in the community that is interested in learning more about those things.
Thank you. That sounds awesome. And the work that you're going to be doing with first responders is definitely needed.
Yeah.
So I look forward to seeing more about that. Shelley, will you please share your final thoughts?
Well, first of all, it's been a huge thrill to have me on here so I can have a voice and take experiences of what I've done with the people that I've worked with and shared their voices and their thoughts. And thank you to everybody that's tuned in and that will tune in afterwards. Um, I think stigma is our worst enemy. We've been fighting this for 40, 50 years. And in some ways, the disability community has made immense strides. But I think that stigma is still the biggest and last really big hurdle that we need to overcome. I think we need to move less of a medical model and more of a societal model of community and understanding of an inclusiveness and diversity. Reach out and watch Netflix's Crip Camp, and reach out to Judy Human and her team that will continue to fight for this. And pick up that torch and keep marching on for all of us, whether it's LGBTQ and our brown and black brothers and sisters out there, and our disability, mental and physical wellness folks that are in that community. We all have a voice. We all have a talent, and we are all beautiful inside and out as holistic beings. God doesn't make mistakes. Lady Gaga sang that so brilliantly and beautifully. And, I just finished binge watching Schitt's Creek with Dan Levy and Emily Hampshire and his father, Eugene Levy, and Catherine O'Hara, and it was so beautifully done, and it was a very inclusive, beautiful way of thinking, and not judging. And I really
Right.
think that employers and tourism and hospitality and our future generation of children, parents need to do a better job of stepping it up. And if they see a person with a disability and their child is curious and they're curious, I've never really met anybody with a disability that said, no, I don't want to talk about it. And if they
Mhm.
do, okay, then maybe they're having a bad day. We never know what somebody else is going through. And we
Yes.
need to lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. You got to be that
Yeah.
queen that fixes another one's crown before the world
Woo.
realizes it was ever
Yes.
crooked.
Woo. Okay. Absolutely. I love it. Beautifully worded. We need to practice kindness and fix each other's crown.
Yes, we do.
Lillian says, thank you so much. This topic is having to leave a career due to becoming disabled, then re-envision to aspire becoming a medical coder between my progressive to rare diseases and special needs child. So Lillian really appreciates this
Great.
conversation and your points. So
Good.
it's been helpful. Everyone, please hit like and share this information because it shares it with other people in your network. And I definitely appreciate this. Shelley, how can people get in contact with you?
So they can find me on LinkedIn under Shelly with a Y Hauser, and I'm on Instagram and under I think Shelly Namaste, and they could also call me on my cell 610-504-5240 or shauser382@gmail.com, or reach out to you if they can't find me on any of those platforms.
Okay, it sounds good. Thank you again so much. And to all the viewers and listeners, thank you for tuning in. Hit like or share, drop comments. We'll still be monitoring this stream, and we'll also have another LinkedIn tomorrow. Don't forget to join my Facebook group. It's about diversity, equality, and inclusion, and we'll start having candid conversations starting June 1st. To join, the link is in the bottom. It is uh, bit.ly DEIGC, but it's in the bottom. So we'll see you next time. Peace, love, and many blessings to you. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.